Rebecca, if we can start with you. I mean, people say that, the BBC is a national treasure, it's a national institution, it's cheap at half the price. Lots of people watch it. It's, £172 a year for everything that they produce. It's a small amount to pay.
Or will be.
What's your...
Will be 172.
Well, indeed, if it does go to that. What's your response to that?
My response to that is that people now need to have a choice whether or not they want to pay for the BBC. And at the moment, it's attached to all live broadcast TV. BBC is obliged under its charter, it's legally obliged under its charter to be impartial. The BBC now, with the furore that we've seen with Gary Lineker over the last week and a bit, is in breach of that contract. And so the BBC the licence fee needs to be scrapped, absolutely. And people need to have a choice about whether or not they want to pay for the BBC. So the BBC needs to move over onto a subscription type model or an advertising model and stand on its own 2 feet. And then, then Gary will be free to say whatever he likes to say. We're not against free speech. It's just about freedom of choice about paying for it or not.
What about the soft power that the BBC brings, Rebecca, around the world? I mean, you go around the world and people look up to the BBC and say that it's one of the things that they cherish about Britain, the fact that they can rely on the news. People who live in maybe authoritarian states, they rely on the BBC to get their information in that impartial way. Do you not think that it enhances Britain's soft power around the world?
Actually, we hear quite a lot of complaints from other people in other countries, so for example in India and Kashmir, we have the BBC wading into that debate and taking an impartial view in that way. And so we get complaints from people around the world who are sort of saying, it's great what Defund the BBC are doing, we support you. So whilst there might be some element of soft power and an audience for the BBC outside the UK, well, that's great, but let those people pay for it then, because it's great that they can enjoy the content that we're paying for and that we're reluctantly forced to pay for if we watch any live broadcast TV. I think that argument is really beginning to lose weight.
So, Roger Bolton, do you think the BBC has lost its way? If you look at the polling, people now saying a majority, we don't want to have this sort of mandatory forced licence, whether that's in the Techni poll or whether it's in the Telegraph. Has the BBC lost its way?
No. Shall I say, first of all, apologise for the fact I'm not wearing a tie after the last discussion. We were talking about that. Secondly, I've been fired twice for the BBC, so I'm not a spokesman for that. But I think this debate starts at the wrong place. It should start with saying, it's an upside-down debate. Do we still need public service broadcasting? If so, how best should it be delivered, say, by the BBC or some other way? How should we pay for it, and how much should we pay for it? There's no point starting at the bottom and arguing about the licence fee if you haven't got in place arguments about public service broadcasting. Now, going back to what you said, has the BBC lost its way? No, it's been cocking up over the last week. About every 3 or 4 years, the BBC cocks up in a bad way. And it usually cocks up because the country's divided. On the Lineker thing, country absolutely divided. You read one set of newspapers, one set of polls, you'll see the country's divided. And somebody said in the past, if the country's divided, the BBC's, on the rack. The question is, do we want public service broadcasting or not? Do we want an organisation in its news area which tries to be impartial, fails, but tries? And I have no time for people who say nobody's impartial. It's like saying, because you can't be perfect, you shouldn't try to be good. It must constantly strive for impartiality, listen to critics, look at your own prejudices, but make an effort, because finally, look what's happening in the United States. The majority, 70% of Republicans, believe that Donald Trump won the election and that there was cheating at the polls, and there's no evidence at all. And why do they believe that? Because there isn't a BBC. All there is are organisations like Fox and other things who are scared to tell the truth. And their executives, we now know, and Rupert Murdoch from the emails, know what the truth is. Trump lost the election. They're scared to do it because they hit their profits. Now, do we want to go there?
Roger, Rebecca's point is that people should have a choice here. I mean, look, if people don't want to watch the BBC, why should they pay for it? And if people do want to watch the BBC, if it's such good value for money and it gives such a good service, what has the BBC got to fear from a subscription model? Because presumably everyone will be queuing around the block to subscribe to it if it's still such a wonderful job. And the idea that you need the BBC for public service broadcasting, there's probably more public service broadcasting on Sky Arts channel alone than in the entirety of the BBC. You don't need the BBC for public service broadcasting, do you?
Thank you for your objective assessment of the situation. By the way, I enjoy Sky Arts as well. Look, the first thing to say, if you put all those arguments aside about public service, it's ridiculous. Public service is there to do things that to in some ways deal with market failure. And we do that in our taxation scheme generally. You know, we have people pay for things they'll never use because we decide as a country things are important. Minorities need to be dealt with. Children's programs ought to be there. There aren't just cartoons imported from the States. Local journalism is central to local democracy. We care about minorities. Now, if you don't, and you say, OK, survival of the fittest, go ahead.
Channel 4 do that, Roger. Channel 4, do they make a big thing that they appeal to audiences that other people don't?
So you don't believe in competition? I thought a man like you would have to believe in competition. But,
Roger, can I look at it a different way? Because I've always been a fan of the BBC, and that's why I said, has it lost its way? Is it too big? Is it making so much now that there are programmes people don't watch and don't want to watch and don't? And I have to say, if I now looked at how much I watch the BBC, it's not at all, it's minimal, because it's either making also ran programmes, or going back to the point of impartiality, it never feels that way. So has it lost its way over the years? Is it too big? I'm trying to give excuses for it, Roger, because it obviously has, because the vast majority of the public think that.
Come on, you're also condemning it at the same time as you're making excuses. Look, what's happened fundamentally is people have vastly more choice. And therefore, when they've got choice, BBC's perceptions will fall. But 31% of people watch BBC television, for a start. And by the way, it's not just BBC television, it's radio, it's local radio, it's all digital, it's the news service, it's all of those services. But look, those people are trying to say, get rid of the licence fee, and it's not ideal. I've got to face this fact that subscription won't work in the short term. Subscription works when you have a new service and you can stop people joining a new service. Most people have Freeview, have one or two television sets. You can't just switch off BBC One, BBC Two. And there are still 1.5 million people in this country who aren't digitally connected. I mean, as you as an MP, do you want to some of your constituents say, hey, I've just lost all these services? So I'm not saying...
Well, what I would say, Roger, last year the TV licensing body reported 1 million households had ditched the licence fee in 4 years. That's the turn-off, the rate at the turn-off people, 1 million people.
Oh, well, I don't disagree that we're going in a certain direction. I'm just saying that anybody tells you that you can put subscription in now, kill the licence fee and put subscription in, you can't. By the way, what is going on here? People ought to know this. The government has frozen the licence fee for 2 years. The BBC's spending power in real terms has gone down 30%. 30% in 10 years. So it's making cuts, and it's making unpopular cuts. I don't agree with some of them.
But that's why we talked about the size. It gets about £4.5 billion from the public. It stops supporting its over 75-year-olds. It's putting up its licence fee, and it's getting rid of things like the BBC Choir.
Let me bring...
Hold on.
Let me bring in Rebecca.
This is all... I'm sorry, get your facts right. The BBC... Oh, dear. The BBC has been...
What, the BBC aren't getting £4.5 billion from the public?
No, they aren't. They're getting about 3.7 billion.
OK, £4 billion from the public, because it's 4.5 when I last
I don't disagree, it's a large amount of money. But let's look. The government looked at this, and John Whittingdale and others have tried to get rid of the licence fee. And even though they realise you can't do it in the short term, though they want to do it in the longer term. So the answer to that is you squeeze the BBC, as you have done, you freeze the licence fee, you make it make unpopular cuts. And the government said, nothing to do with us. So the government's put them in a box, which is an awful box, and then they have to make cuts. And I think the public should have a say on what, if it still wants public service broadcasting, and about what will be cut. But don't be led astray by people who say you can switch off now and go to subscription. So, you can't.
Rebecca, what about that point that Roger makes? Whatever the rights and wrongs of a licence fee and whether or not it should be intellectually a subscription channel, that you can't actually technologically do it at the moment, and that if you did scrap the BBC licence fee now, lots of people, well, it's just not feasible. It's just not feasible to do because there's no mechanism for doing it. Do you accept Roger's practical point that even if you agree with it, it's not practical to do it at the moment?
I think that nobody's asking for the BBC licence fee to be switched off overnight. It's a point of making that decision and gradually moving away from it, because it has to start now. Poll after poll shows that 60% plus of the British public want to get rid of the licence fee. There are 1,000 people every month being prosecuted for non-payment of the licence fee. The BBC is extremely opaque about what the rules are about who needs to pay for a licence fee, and more and more we see that young people, as they're coming up, they're not watching live broadcast TV. They don't consume TV in the same way that we used to when I was a child. They don't sit and wait for programmes to be broadcast to them down the line. They're watching everything on demand, and you're seeing that more and more with people over the age of 50 who, thanks to lockdown in a large way, have moved over onto on demand. And once you've made that switch into deciding what you watch when you want to watch it, you don't really want to watch live broadcast TV anymore. So there isn't really the argument for taxing people for watching any live broadcast TV.
Rebecca, Ryan and Roger Bolton, we're going to have to bring this to an end.